Hello and welcome back to Freedom Matters. I'm your host, Mark McIntire. Thank you for being with us. What we do here is we drill down on the concepts of freedom. Everybody on the planet wants to be free. And especially those who are yet to be born, who are about to be born, certainly need protections of the Constitution of the United States, and that's what we do here. Today we're going to be interviewing a global influencer, a thought leader on the questions of abortion, and now, unfortunately, because of many legislators and politicians who are calling for the murder or the infanticide of infants that have already been born, we have as our special guest Mr. Seth Gruber. Seth has been lecturing and speaking about this for about the last 10 years, since he was 18 years old. So he is very well experienced on this topic about how freedom affects the yet to be born and the born. Seth Gruber, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
I want to go back to how you first got into the whole moral question about human life in the womb and immediately after the womb. How did you get involved? What triggered you to get involved this way, Seth?
Yes, that's a great question. And certainly with 46 years of legalized abortion in our country, the thing we need more of is people like me. And so everyone's story is important. And in sharing mine, I hope to inspire others to get involved in this fight, because it is the greatest violation of human rights in the history of the world. So at 18 years old, as a senior in high school in Southern California, I conducted my senior project on abortion. And the reason I selected this topic was because though I grew up in a pro-life family, I didn't feel like I really had all of the tools of thought I needed to truly defend what is the pro-life position. And I grew up in a very pro-life family. My mother was the director of a pregnancy care clinic in Azusa, California in the late 1980s, which is still there, by the way. It's right across the street from Azusa Pacific University. And after I was born as the firstborn, she stepped down from that position, but we remained heavily involved with our local pregnancy resource center in Southern California. And we did the Walk for Life every year. We raised money for the organization. I was a little 6-year-old tyke going door to door raising funds for the pregnancy care clinic every year. And at 6 years old, I was probably more incentivized by the awards of winning a bike or tickets to Disneyland than I was by the mission of the clinic. But as I grew in age and maturity, I began to understand both the horror of abortion and the beauty of life. And so that was why I selected the topic of abortion for my senior project in high school, because I didn't feel like I had all the tools I needed to defend my beliefs.
Now let me ask you, Seth, did you attend a public high school or a private high school?
Public high school.
Public high school. And let me ask you this. What was the prevailing point of view of your teachers, most of them, generally speaking? Would you say that you were comfortable in a high school, public high school, that had a particular view about abortion? And what was that view?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a bit confrontational, and so people not liking me has never really caused me to stay up at night.
Well, that's why you're on my show. We both share that.
Absolutely, yep. And so I felt perfectly comfortable in espousing my pro-life views, because I just don't give a rip what people think about me. But in terms of the culture of the campus, I mean, this was 2009, 2010. So, the majority of people end up being functionally pro-choice, at least until a certain stage of the pregnancy, which is odd enough in itself, and we can talk more about that later.
Oh, we are going to talk about that,
my teachers told me that I couldn't select the topic of abortion because it went against their senior project guidelines.
Wait. Your teachers told you you could not do the topic of abortion for your senior thesis because it went against what?
Their senior project guidelines. So this...
take it away. Go for it.
Conversation, given the name of your show, Freedom Matters.
Freedom Matters. Go ahead.
Because I'm thinking in my head, I'm pretty sure I just came out of a government class where we were talking about the Constitution. Have you read it? So I threatened a lawsuit to my public high school.
Oh, really? Oh, that's the way to get them running, is to threaten up on a lawsuit. Yeah.
I was able to do my senior project without
Good.
any more backlash after that. So that was sort of the beginning of my entrance into the pro-life movement and into
Right.
speaking publicly on behalf of the lives of unborn
Wonderful.
children.
Just as an aside, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to fight for your freedom and your rights, especially under the Bill of Rights, always threaten to go to a lawsuit, okay? Just threaten to. Just talk about it. Because as you can see, that's the one thing they're really afraid of for two reasons. First of all, they're probably going to lose if they suppress your freedom. Secondly, they don't want to see their names or their schools in the newspapers or their organization in the media. That is death to them. It's bad public relations. So those are your two best weapons. But anyway, so you did your senior thesis after threatening a lawsuit, and so now your freedom has been restored, or at least not messed with, right? And so how did it go over? What happened? What happened after that?
Yeah, so I ended up doing my volunteer hours, which were required for your senior project, at an organization in Orange County called the Center for Bioethical Reform. And they engage the culture on the issue of abortion by comparing abortion to historically recognized forms of genocide, such as slavery, such as the Holocaust, such as child slavery, because all of these injustices were defended by a group of people based off of the assumption that the victim class weren't persons, that the victim class didn't have what the powerful people said that you needed in order to be a valuable human being with rights. And so I volunteered with this organization for my senior project. I ended up coming on staff with them as a full-time intern during my summers between college, as I was attending college in Santa Barbara.
Right.
And then I joined the organization I'm with now after I graduated from college. So that's sort of the crash course of my entrance into this industry, and have definitely been poured into and equipped by a lot of thought leaders themselves who have helped me be more successful. And so my hope is to do the same for others.
So you went to college here in Santa Barbara.
That's right.
UCSB?
Westmont College.
Oh, Westmont College.
Yeah.
I've had Dr. Beebe, Gail Beebe, on my radio show, and we spent a whole hour talking about the trivium and the quadrivium. And afterwards, the engineer said to us, "What the hell were you guys talking about?" They had no idea what we were talking about. Anyway, so you had a Westmont.
Well, I have stories about Westmont that could chill your blood.
Really, I can imagine. So at Westmont, did you find a kinder, gentler worldview with respect to abortion, or what did you find there?
Well, certainly kinder, just because when you have 1,200 self-identifying Protestant Christian students, for the most part, you just have a larger sample size and the larger likelihood that they're going to be more pro-life. Because generally speaking, if you're a Christian, you're opposed to abortion on some level. Now, that is becoming less and less true, and there's this whole movement of people like the Episcopalian churches and United Methodist churches that are trying to mainstream pro-choice ideology within the church. But still, for the most part, Christians are opposed to abortion on some level. So there was certainly a kinder culture and atmosphere at Westmont College than at a public university or at a public high school. But I quickly learned as a freshman, 19 years old, when I stepped on that campus, that there was a lot more hostility to the pro-life movement and the pro-life message than I would have thought at a Christian college.
Can you drill down on that? I mean, what was the source of the hostility?
Yes. So this is a very interesting story, especially given that you've had
do tell
on your show, who I respect and I know he has a huge heart for the college, but as it pertains to the issue of abortion, Westmont College has remained largely silent. So I became the founder and president of the first pro-life club at Westmont College.
Really?
And yes, and it took me an entire semester. So it wasn't until the second semester of my freshman year that I was able to find a faculty advisor. It took me a whole semester to find a faculty individual who would step up to be the advisor for the club, and you can't be a recognized club until you have a faculty advisor. So at 19 years old, that was a bit shocking to me at all, that it was so hard for me to find someone.
Yeah.
So I eventually did. And then I began conducting educational displays on campus. We formed a partnership with Network Medical, which is Santa Barbara's pregnancy care clinic. And the director there, Betsy Gray, who's a good friend of mine. I did some trainings on campus. We had some guest speakers for Students for Life of America. And so we did a lot of things like that were focused on equipping Christians how to be a voice for the unborn, and then how to engage culture on an issue that we're told is just a woman's rights issue, a woman's conscience issue. Mm-hmm. So I proposed a genocide awareness project, which is put on by the pro-life organization, the Center for Bioethical Reform, that I interned with during my summers between college and for my senior project. Mm-hmm. So I petitioned an event through the student government at Westmont College to bring this display onto campus. I did that my freshman year, I did that my sophomore year, I did that my junior year. And when I did that, I petitioned. It was never approved for 3 years in a row by the student government.
By the student government? Because they were going to give you the money, because that's the way student clubs work.
No, it's actually a free event. The Center for Bioethical Reform, the organization I worked with, covers all of the costs affiliated with making the presentation happen. So I was requesting zero funding, and I just had to request permission for the event to happen.
That's astonishing. I'm glad you've told this story, because I was unaware of the fact that the student government would not give the money for even a free event that was going to be sponsored by the presenting organization.
Because Westmont is a private Christian college, and so all events like that have to be approved by the student government. In fact, by my junior year, I wasn't even given the opportunity to meet with the student government. The faculty advisor of the student government told me, Seth, we said no to you the last 2 years. The answer is still no. So I didn't even have the opportunity to take the proposed event before the student government for a vote. I was just shut down by the faculty.
So let's hear it for the First Amendment, freedom. Let's hear it for the First Amendment. And this is at what's billed as a Christian liberal arts college, and it's one of the top 5, I believe, in the country. So are you telling me that in your experience, and you've been lecturing now and speaking publicly as a voice for the unborn and now for the born, are you telling me that the situation is almost as bad in private schools as it is in public schools about this question?
Yeah, it certainly is almost as bad. And there are a handful of Christian colleges that have remained a strong voice for life. Yeah. But they are few and far between now, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And so the political science department, and I can actually send you this study after our time that you can share with your viewers. The political science department at Westmont College conducted a study, I believe in 2013, because I was a junior, and the study was on, it might have been 2012, on the partisanship of faculty members, so not staff, these are professors. And over 60%, it was between 60 and 65% of faculty, so these are professors who signed a statement of faith at Westmont College, voted for Obama in his second term.
60%?
Over 60%. So what's that mean? Well, what that means is that over half of the teaching professors at Westmont College who signed a statement of faith voted for the most pro-abortion president in American history in his second term, after he'd already proved how pro-abortion he was.
Now, for the sake of our viewers, would you explain what it means for faculty members, and I believe it's also students must sign a statement of faith. Is that correct at Westmont College? Do students have to sign a statement of faith?
No, students don't have to.
Especially if you're Jewish or Muslim, you don't have to sign.
Right.
But explain for the viewers what it means for a faculty person to have to sign a statement of faith in order to teach at Westmont College.
Yeah, so they're signing a statement of faith that affirms the Orthodox creeds of the history of the church that have largely been uncontroversial for the history of the church. Mm-hmm. So the beliefs in who Christ is as the the first member, one member of the Trinity, of the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, and all these things that the church has agreed upon for 2,000 years. And certainly one of those is love your neighbor. Certainly one of those is don't shed innocent blood, right?
Right.
I'm pretty sure that whether it's written, unwritten, it's assumed within a Christian university that you can't kill people.
Yeah, that would seem to be a fair assumption to make, that killing people. So now this really gets us into the deeper philosophical and theological question about who is a person and when is a person, right? Okay, right. So when in your experience, I can answer this from my experience, but when from your experience, Seth, did it become okay morally from a Christian perspective even and even Christian private schools, to start to tinker with the notion that at the point of conception, you're not quite yet a person. When did that first begin to bubble up in your experience?
Sure. I mean, abortions have been happening for a long time, right?
Right.
Abortions were happening before the legalization of Roe versus Wade in 1973 in our country.
Yeah.
They were just much smaller numbers, and we knew so much less about the science of embryology in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, even in the early 1980s. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the type of medical advancements that enabled us to have a window to the womb like we do now. And so we know so much more about prenatal development, about who the baby is in the womb. And so this understanding and this assumption and this idea that arose in our culture that abortion is okay because the unborn is not a person, or at least not in the first trimester, right? Oh, maybe they become more of a human later, maybe they have more rights later, but certainly not in the first trimester. And you know the language, a blob of tissue, it's tissue potential to a person, it's not a person.
Clump of cells. Yeah, I used to get
And
thousands of, in my 51 years as a professor of philosophy, I've literally got thousands of papers on abortion. And it always intrigued me, I didn't inject my own view. I allowed them to choose the question of abortion. I allowed them to do whatever side of it they wished. I had far more people advocating that it's just a clump of cells, that then they argue the viability issue. The viability thing is really interesting because what happens with the pro-abortion philosophy and theology is that human beings are now going to put metrics, little markers, and as the embryo progresses along these markers, it becomes more human, as though it were a giraffe before the markers were put down, or maybe a pine tree. The illogic of suggesting that a human zygote, a human embryo, is not a human person is a weird concept. It's just weird.
Right. That's true.
It's not a turtle.
The pro-life. That's right. Yeah.
And so they've introduced these viability issues, and I'm sure you get this all the time. But they have a very hard time. They have a very, very hard time proving their case. In one case, when I was teaching live in class, I would look at the clock and I'd say, okay, so let's imagine now the clock is moving, and all of a sudden, no baby. Baby! Is that what you're talking about? And
right.
Who determines that? Who?
Right.
You?
Yeah.
Determine this? And then they go to,
yeah.
Oh, it's a woman's body. The woman, only the woman has the right. You know what I used to say to that? Okay, fine. Just give me back my sperm and we'll call it a day. Give me back the sperm. And they would look at me like, what type of a weird person is this? You can't give back the sperm. Well, that's the point, isn't it? You can't give back the sperm. So have you encountered these fallacious arguments for abortion in your speaking engagements? Do you get these, or do you get some other objections?
Yeah, no, of course, all the time. I get this stuff all the time. And what's important for us is to clarify what the case for life even is.
Yeah, please.
What is the pro-life contention and what is the pro-life argument? Because all of these various arguments that we hear in defense of abortion, they usually assume that the unborn is not a human being. They usually commit the logical fallacy of begging the question,
right,
where you assume the very thing that you would need to prove in order for your argument to work in the first place. And so we can certainly look at some of the pro-choice arguments, but if we do, or when we do, I personally want to address what the pro-life argument even is, because pro-life individuals who are opposed to abortion and believe in the humanity and dignity of the unborn child are often ill-equipped to offer a gracious and persuasive defense of their pro-life beliefs in the public square. Engage compassionately with those that disagree with us, and invite them to examine evidence they haven't seen or heard before. So the pro-life message, the pro-life case is made scientifically and philosophically. And our case is both scientifically and philosophically sound.
Yeah.
And so scientifically, pro-life advocates argue according to the science of embryology, which teaches us that from the moment of conception, the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. When we say distinct, we don't mean we mean a separate entity, right? It's not actually part of the mother's body.
Right, and no other entity has existed in the history of entities except that procreated being. It's a separate being. It's not just the woman and it's not just the man. It's the combination of the woman and the man.
Right, so it's a distinct, living, and whole human being, distinct because it's actually a separate entity than the mother. And I always graciously ask people who disagree with me this question. If the unborn child is part of the mother's body, right, so it's not distinct, it's part of the mother's body, then if and when the mother, is pregnant with a male child, does the mother have a penis? Because if it's part of the mother's body, then it would also follow that the mother has 20 fingers, 20 toes, potentially 2 different blood types.
Right.
That's part of the mother's body. So clearly that's ludicrous. The unborn child is distinct living because it's directing its own internal growth, and dead things don't grow. No pregnant woman sits there at lunchtime and goes, and then just wills that baby to grow. Come on, it's the lunchtime growth fest, right? That baby is directing its own internal growth. And the unborn child is whole. When we say the unborn child is whole, we don't mean fully developed, right? What we mean is that everything that's necessary for that unborn child to realize his or her full growth and potential as a participating member of the human species is already present at the moment of conception. Mm-hmm. Just like I, as a 27-year-old, have everything I need to realize my development and maturity as a 30-year-old, even though I'm not 30 yet. They say men don't reach their mental peak till their 40s. So I'm still developing, and I have everything I need to reach that level of development, even though I haven't yet. That's what we mean when we say the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. This is what the science of embryology teaches us, and pro-abortion philosophers admit this, and any science of embryology textbook on any college campus is going to affirm the same thing.
Well, and it also lays bare the whole fallacy of trying to put markers or metrics down. The latest metric, I don't know if you've read the latest metric, the latest metric about the viability, they're sort of retreating on the viability issue because they realize how absurd it is to arbitrarily and capriciously say, 1 minute ago it wasn't a baby, but now the next minute it's a baby. That's just ridiculous. Right. Okay, but now the latest one, I just read this in Skeptic magazine that's published by Michael Shermer, who's been on the show, and we talk about this a lot. The latest one is, here's the metric. If a being has never been conscious or is not now conscious, then it is not a human being. Seriously, all right? Now, let's just take that one apart. I'll let you take first bite out of that apple, okay? How would you handle that apple if that was thrown at you?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so we're engaging in thought experiments now, right? Which are very helpful because they do expose ideas and they expose the application of those ideas in real life and what that actually looks like for human beings who are living. Right. So even if when a thought experiment may not be practical, it's the application of these ideas. And so the whole consciousness argument is, of course, just ludicrous because we would never accept the application of consciousness to dictate value if we were talking about born people. And those that do are moral monsters, right? If someone is in a coma and we're told that they may not, or let's say that they won't. Let's say the doctors tell the family that this person will not regain consciousness. Right. Is it okay for me as a third party to sneak into the hospital room and slit the patient in a coma's throat? Right. Well, according to the logic, they were never going to regain consciousness. Right. But that would be, and even if the family was in the midst of deciding whether to remove support, it would be wrong and immoral for me to enter in and slit the throat of that coma patient's throat. Mm-hmm. So the application of these types of requirements for the unborn to have value are ultimately morally bankrupt because we would not accept those requirements if we were talking about born people.
Not only that, but also if we were talking about people who are simply in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, who really don't have a consciousness the way you and I would probably agree, and the way that even pro-life and pro-choice people would agree is conscious. So using this new logic, this new definition, and it does really come down to accepting other people's definitions in argument. if we accept this new metric that if you were never conscious or you are not now conscious, then we could go to every single retirement home where we have advanced cases of Alzheimer's and simply kill them.
That's right.
That would be morally acceptable. Okay, let me move on to this other question, Seth. And I'm sure this is something that you've dealt with. Is there any wiggle room here? Is there any moral wiggle room within the Christian community, the Christian faith, to disagree on this issue of procreation, that life starts at procreate? Is there any, in your view, any wiggle room? How could you possibly make a case for the opposition?
Yeah, there's no room at all. There's absolutely no room at all. If you're a Christian and you affirm that you believe in the authority of Scripture, in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, then there is absolutely no room for Christians to disagree on this issue. Now, we're not God. We can't judge the heart. So I'm not going to say that a Christian who identifies as pro-choice can't be a Christian. I'm not going to make that statement.
Good.
But there is only one Christian position on abortion. There is only one Christian position on this issue, and it is the pro-life position. Biblically speaking, if we want to look at the biblical worldview for those who say that they believe in the authority of Scripture, then Scripture teaches that human beings have value because they're created in the image of God, right? From Genesis, from the beginning. So he created man and woman in his image. In the image of God, he created them. And so human beings have intrinsic value because they bear the image of their maker, who is the all-powerful, all-good, all-loving, supreme being. And so that's why we have value. And that's how Christians explain the valueness of humans over other species, right? And then Scripture strictly forbids the shedding of innocent blood. God says that he hates hands that shed innocent blood. He repeatedly tells his people, Israel, do not shed innocent blood. Abortion is the shedding of innocent blood. And we know that the unborn child in the womb is a human being, is a human person, because that's what the science of embryology teaches us. So prohibition against the shedding of innocent blood in Scripture would apply equally to the unborn. Scripture doesn't have to tell us, thou shalt not abort, for Christians to understand that abortion is wrong, because it says don't murder.
Right.
It says don't shed innocent blood, and it says, oh, I knit you together in your mother's womb, right? You're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that all human beings bear the image of God. If all human beings bear the image of God, then the unborn bears the image of God because they're a human being. This is not complex. And so there is room for Christians to disagree on this issue.
Well, now you can see why when Alex Madagian, who is the vice president for talent acquisition, who booked Seth Gruber on my show, on our show today, you can see why when Alex Madagian first approached me to be faculty advisor to his critical thinking club at Santa Barbara City College, the first person he wanted to bring in as a speaker was this gentleman here, Seth Gruber. I think you can now understand why no faculty member, not one faculty member at Santa Barbara City College would dare to debate this man live on stage in front of a student and a faculty audience. You can see now why. This man is very clear about defending the freedom and being a voice for the unborn. Let me hit you with a hard question now. Now, in all of my abortion papers that I've received, as I say, almost all of them were pro-choice, which is an interesting euphemism. Okay, so I'm free to choose. I'm in favor of choosing death rather than life. Okay, it's very interesting. The hard question in some of the papers that actually I gave good grades to, who were pro-choice, was the argument from rape. What happens when a sex act results in a pregnancy, a procreation of a new, distinct, whole human being, as you have defined it? What about rape? Why must a woman be forced to carry the offspring of an act of violence that is so vile and immoral as the act of rape? That's a pretty powerful argument. How do you handle that?
Sure. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, how do we treat people that remind us of painful events? That's ultimately the question that has to be asked. Because here's the thing. The unborn child shouldn't have to suffer for the crimes of the father. When we examine pregnancies that arise from rape, we have to examine the three parties involved, and there are three. a pregnancy that arises from rape involves the rapist, the innocent mother, and the innocent unborn child. And so I always ask people the question, to whom should we assign the death penalty? To whom would you assign the death penalty? Because, as it turns out, the mother is an innocent victim, although there are countries in our world who will murder women who have been raped, and they call it honor killings because they associate being raped with shame, which is a disgusting, immoral practice because the woman is an innocent victim. So we would never give the death penalty in America to the woman, now the mother who was raped. Now, secondly, while some people might argue that we should, in fact, assign the death penalty to the rapist, it's illegal for a woman who's raped to murder her rapist. So if it's illegal and wrong to take the life, to kill, to murder the rapist, who's the only guilty individual, and we would never assign the death penalty to the mother, why would we assign the death penalty to the baby who's just as innocent as his or her mother?
It was actually Thomas Aquinas. It was actually Thomas Aquinas said concerning the abortion issue. He said that why are we killing the only really innocent person in the whole process of rape, as you've just laid it out? Certainly, a woman is an innocent victim. There's no question about that, and her rights have to be defended. There's certainly the man who's the rapist is guilty as sin because it is a vile thing of violence. But why is it that people are so ready to dispose of the only innocent person, namely the child? It baffles me. I don't understand it.
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, abortion is the idea that we have the right to make difficult life problems just go away.
Yeah.
That's ultimately the idea behind abortion. And so people will make the argument to pro-lifers like you and me, Mark. They'll say, how dare you force a woman to have a baby that was conceived in rape? What if that baby looks like the rapist? You're going to force her to look into the face of her rapist, in the face of her child for the rest of her life?
Yeah.
So again, we have to ask ourselves the question, how should we treat human beings in our lives who remind us of painful events? Here's an idea. Let's let the baby be born and then begin to examine his development to see whether he does begin to bear the same appearance as his father, the rapist. If he doesn't, let him live. If he does, let's kill him. But any pro-choice individual is going to reject that idea. But that same idea, that same rationale, as long as the baby is in a different location, as long as the baby is in the womb.
Well,
so where one is, no bearing on who one is.
Well, that brings us to our, we only get 25 more minutes in the show. It's going by so quickly, Seth. That brings us, of course, to the contemporary question. In many states, I think there are at least 7 states now, Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, you're more informed than I am, but there are 7 states now where legislators, politicians, following popular appeal, mass appeal, to introduce legislation that would either allow an abortion surviving baby to just die on a slab of marble, as they used to do in Sparta, just to give the baby no nourishment, no medical attention, no cuddling, no emotional support. Just let the baby die because it survived an abortion, and many do. Oh, the other one is that we actually can kill the baby because after it's born, it can be, quote, this is the North Carolina legislation where the governor was on the radio and TV and saying, well,
Virginia.
Yeah, is it Virginia? Is it Virginia?
Virginia.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Virginia, where the newborn infant, okay, is made comfortable while a doctor and the mom, no mention of the dad, while a doctor and the mom decide whether or not the child should be killed. Now this is infanticide. The killing of infants is called infanticide, like soricide, fratricide, matricide, and patricide. We have all these great sounding words, but infanticide is killing an infant that's been born. How in the world did we get to a place where we're now debating legislation about killing infants? How?
Yeah, that's right. And so before, in order to answer that question, I need to briefly revisit the conversation on personhood. because this impacts how we think
That's right.
about infanticide, because ultimately we're talking about the same human being at a different level of their physical development.
Right.
So I am going to address the current debate in our country in regards to infanticide and the decision from the U.S. Senate 2 nights ago. But before I do, I want to briefly examine the philosophical argument for the pro-life position.
Take it away.
So I mentioned that pro-lifers make their case from science and philosophy, and our case is scientifically and philosophically sound. We already looked at what the scientific case is. I've already made that case. That's what the science of embryology teaches us. Philosophically, pro-life advocates make their argument from a value standpoint, because those who affirm the science of embryology will then make an argument that, oh, but it's not a person. They'll say, yes, the science is right. You know, we all know it's a human being because its parents are humans, and human beings reproduce after their own kind. But it's not a person, and persons have rights, and person is a legal term, and the unborn's not a person. That's the argument, essentially.
Right.
So how do we respond to that? Philosophically, pro-life advocates argue that there's no meaningful or value-giving difference between the embryo you once were and the adult that you are today that would justify taking your life at that earlier stage. So let me say that in a more simplistic way. There's no meaningful or value-giving difference between who you were in the womb and who you are outside the womb that makes it okay to take your life in the womb. Now, there are clearly differences between the embryo in the womb and you and I.
Right.
There are clearly differences. But the pro-life argument philosophically is that none of those differences matter from a moral perspective in determining your right to life, in determining your right to not be killed by someone else. But to remember what some of the differences are, because it is helpful to talk about these differences, because the differences between the unborn and the born are often the differences that pro-choice individuals point to justify abortion, right?
Right.
So to look at what some of those differences are very briefly. So to help us remember the four main differences between embryo Mark and adult Mark, we're going to propose the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D. Okay, it's a very difficult concept for you and I in Southern California, but we'll work with it. So S stands for size. Yes, it's true, the unborn child is smaller than the newborn child. But I'm 6'3", and I'm taller than most people I know. But it's not okay for me to kill someone else just because they're smaller. Men are generally larger than women, but that difference is not an excuse or a justification to injure, wound, harm, or kill those who are smaller. So size has nothing to do with our human value and right to life.
Right.
Size, level of development. Yes, it's true, the unborn child is less developed than the newborn child. Just like the newborn child is less developed than the toddler, and the toddler is less developed than the teenager. Just like you are more developed than me, Mark, simply in virtue of being older. But it's not more wrong to kill you and more okay to kill me just because you're more developed. So size and level of development have nothing to do with the abortion issue. Size, level of development, environment, where one is located. Yes, it's true, the unborn child is located in his or her mother's womb, a very unique location. By the way, the natural location where he or she is supposed to be. But where one is has no bearing on who one is. We're in two different locations right now. We're in two different cities. Is it okay to kill Mark in Santa Barbara but not Seth in Orange County? No, of course not.
But if you're from New York, if you were from New York, it'd be a different story.
Yeah. Where you are has no bearing on who you are.
Right.
So why does 6-inch journey down the birth canal change the unborn child from something that we can kill through legalized abortion to something that we're required to protect by law?
Right.
And lastly, dependency. So size, level of development, environment, and dependency. Yes, it's true, the unborn child is dependent on the mother for his or her life, right? But and in the first trimester and early second trimester, that baby can't survive apart from the mother, though medical advancements are enabling us to save premature born babies earlier and earlier. But if your dependency on someone or something else for your life dictates your right to life and your value, then we'd have to admit that all of those dependent on heart pacemakers, kidney machines, insulin, and life support are non-persons and can be killed as such because they're dependent on something without which they cannot continue to live. So that's the basic philosophical pro-life case, that there's no meaningful difference between who you were in the womb and who you are outside the womb that makes it okay to kill you in the womb. And size, level of development, environment, and dependency are not good reasons for saying you had no right to life in the womb. Oh, but you do now that you've been born. So the scientific and philosophic case together make an airtight case for the value of the unborn child. But today, as you mentioned, we're seeing individuals, legislators, governors propose essentially legislation or not vote on legislation that would protect the lives of babies who are born alive during failed abortions. And like you said, this is infanticide. And the reason why it was so important to look at the philosophical case is because there is no meaningful difference between the embryo at 7 weeks and the infant who's just been born that makes it okay to kill either of them. And any of the differences between the embryo and the infant are differences that you and I differ in: size, level of development, location, and dependency. And so Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia in January last month defended legislator Kathy Tran's bill that was going to legalize abortion in Virginia until the day of birth. A woman could be dilating, about to give birth, and abortion would be legal. Now, this bill was rejected, thank God. But then Governor Northam went on a radio show responding to the anger that a lot of people had at his legislator, Kathy Tran's bill. And exactly what you said. He said, well, I'll tell you what would happen. If a baby was born alive during a botched abortion, that baby would be kept comfortable, resuscitated if that's what the mother wanted, and then the mother and the physician would have a conversation. And then he just stopped talking. That was his statement. Have a conversation about what?
Yeah.
The only thing we should be doing is caring for that baby. So this is where we find ourselves today. The pro-choice worldview is just as easily applied to killing born people as it is to killing unborn people.
Well, all of this comes from the fact that our schools, both public and private, more so public than private, but our schools have prepared the groundwork because they have removed logic and evidence. You have presented a logical case based upon scientific evidence to back up that an embryo, a newly begotten human being, has rights and freedoms, and that must be protected. And if you remove logic and evidence, which the postmodern school system has done, if you remove that, then you can inject the feelings of the mother, the feelings of society, the feelings of economists who say we have too many people to begin with, we can't feed them all. So in other words, as soon as you take logic and evidence out of the debate for abortion, which is what happened, then you can advance these kinds of legislation. You can put this out because so many people out there, the voters who voted these people into office, are actually supporting this legislation. And the reason for that is because they have taken away objective principles and values of logic, objective principles of science and empiricism. So a whole political party now, the Democrat Party, in my view, has become a party of death.
Yeah.
Not life, but death.
Yeah.
You're
absolutely right, Mark.
If this passes in any state whatsoever, and it seems as though it will somewhere along the line, then we have crossed a river, a line.
That's right.
That is irretrievable. We can't go back from this. There's no, because
Right.
once you say it's okay to kill any born individual for whatever reason, then at the other end of the spectrum, as we're talking about Alzheimer's patients, people who are mentally ill, people who just don't seem to be able to function properly. So why not kill them? Why not just start killing
Right.
people?
Right, and you're right. This is exactly where we're going. And as disgusting as it is, we shouldn't be surprised. We should not be surprised because the worldview behind the pro-choice movement is not that you have value intrinsically based on your human nature. That's the pro-life position. The worldview behind the pro-choice position is that you have value based off of what you can perform. It's an argument from your instrumental good, not your intrinsic
Right.
good.
Your
It's
value,
you have value based off of arbitrarily determined characteristics that you had no control over. And if that is where we are going as a society, and abortion is proof that that is where we already are, then there's nothing that keeps that worldview back. There's nothing that keeps that worldview restrained from being applied to justifying killing born people.
Yeah.
Because their whole argument is that your value is based off of your size, your intellect, your level of development, your dependency, your viability, your consciousness, your desires, your ability to dream, all arbitrarily determined characteristics that born people differ in. And so now we're seeing the logical progression of that worldview being applied to killing born people.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've landed on something very, very important on the philosophical, the nub of this discussion. Prior to 1944, the year I was born, babies, infants had value intrinsically in and of themselves. They were not conceived to be value to other people. That was not the way in which we measured the value of life. Today, it's just the reverse. Today, the pro-choice argument is predicated on this assumption, this premise, that your value is only relative to your value to other people. And the root of this is Marxism. It was Karl Marx who secreted into the philosophy of the West in psychology and in economics and sociology and anthropology and even in religion, secreted the notion that human value is value to others.
That's right, yeah.
And this is where I think the whole thing has gone off the track. What is your prognostication, however? Are we going to really go down this road of becoming a society of death? Or is there a pushback underway? Is there a point at which we are going to see a reversal of this? What's your view?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you know, it's always hard to predict, where culture is going to go and where the political landscape is going to go. But it was a strange event that we had in the election of Donald Trump. We were facing a candidate who would have made Obama look pro-life. We were facing a candidate who would have outstripped him in every way in terms of ruling in a pro-abortion ideology, and that was a narrow rescue. We narrowly avoided disaster there. Pro-life pregnancy centers were facing being forced to advertise abortion. Physicians were looking at being forced to perform abortions against their will. And in God's strange providence, we got Donald Trump. And I'm not here to discuss his successes, his shortcomings. But as it pertains to the abortion issue alone, he has been the most pro-life president in American history. And the case that ruled whether pro-life pregnancy centers ought to be forced to advertise abortion services on the walls of their center, that case we won by one vote. And we won because of Neil Gorsuch. With Hillary, that decision goes the other way.
Right.
So we were able to secure some big victories, right? But our battle is far from gone, and it can go the other way very quickly. With another radical pro-abortion leftist president. Things can go the other way very quickly. But we do live in a constitutional republic, right? That was built on the notion of freedom. And so we're certainly still living in a country where we have the freedom to change things. And there's a lot in there, obviously. The Supreme Court is far too powerful. Congress members are far too powerful, but Senate members, but there's a lot we can still do, right? And so I do believe I will see abortion overturned in my lifetime, and that is what the pro-life movement is working towards. And most Americans do not support the type of radical abortion agenda that the current Democratic Party has. The average American, regardless of whether they're a registered Democrat or Republican, do not align with the radical agenda of the Democratic Party right now. And point in case here, Mark, was two evenings ago, and I'm publishing a piece on my blog today addressing this. The U.S. Senate voted on the Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And had it passed, what this bill would have done was just say, hey, if a baby's born alive during a botched abortion, you can't kill it. You have to take it to a hospital. It has to be treated in the same way and with the same level of expertise and medical attention that you would treat any other baby born at the same gestational age. That's all this bill said. It said that women would not be criminalized, but that born alive babies during botched abortions had to be protected. The cases had to be reported, and if an abortionist killed that baby, he could be faced with charges for the murder of an innocent human being. Mm-hmm. That's all this proposed legislation would have done. It wasn't about abortion. It wasn't about women's rights. It was about infanticide. Mm-hmm. And 44 Democrats voted against it, and 54 total people voted for it, with only 3 Democrats crossing the aisle to vote for it. Mm-hmm. And it needed 60 to overcome the filibuster initiated by Democrats. So we failed to pass this bill because of the Democratic Party, 44 Senate members of which said no. If a baby's born alive during a botched abortion, then the abortionist can do whatever he wants with that baby. We're not going to pass legislation to protect that baby. Yeah. So the Democratic Party is the party of abortion, and they are quickly becoming the party of infanticide, and that does not align with the majority of American people. So there's still hope to overturn this and promote a culture of life and protect that life through legislation.
Well, that's why I've labeled them the party of death.
That's right.
I mean, I was a Democrat. I was a liberal Democrat when I was your age, all the way up until I was about 40 years old. I didn't really begin to make the transition. But when it came to abortion, even though I was a liberal at the time and a Democrat at the time, I drew the line at abortion. That why are we murdering the only innocent party of the 3 who are involved in a rape or any sex act? Exactly. Yeah. So I could not philosophically unwind that, because that's what I. Yeah. But I wanted to just mention that I don't really know how politically the Democrat Party hopes to get any advance in the campaigns by advertising infanticide and by promoting infanticide. I maybe I'm completely screwy and I'm just not up to it, which could possibly be, in which case I should probably be aborted at my age of 75 now, because I obviously don't have the credentials to agree with the pro-life, the pro-choice people. So $60 million was defunded from the Planned Parenthood, your major antagonists in this whole campaign, right, of you're making a voice for the unborn and now the born. You're right that there is this pushback that's coming, but it's going to be very slow. And the other thing is that we do have to recognize that in a democracy, people have the right to be pro-choice. They have the right to advocate abortion. They have the right to advocate even infanticide. And I would not be opposed to silencing these people, but I am opposed to defunding them. I am opposed to defunding them.
Yeah, okay. And just as they have the right to articulate their pro-choice position, we have the right, the freedom, and the powers to advertise in a very public nature before the whole country the moral decay and bankruptcy of the pro-choice position and of the current Democratic Party. This is a piece of news that should be spread across the entire country to every individual considering who to vote for when the Democratic Party selects their Democratic candidate. All six current Democrats, legislators, senators, etc., who announced that they were running for president, they all voted against the Abortion Survivors Protection Act.
Really? I didn't know that.
They all said, nope, we are not going to vote to say, hey, if a baby's born alive during a botched abortion, you can't kill it. Mm-hmm. You got to take it to a hospital. You got to report that it happened. Right. Oh, and by the way, we're not even going to prosecute the mother. They said, no, we don't like that. All six Democrats who announced that they're running for the office of the president. Mm-hmm. That's disgusting. That's immoral. And no free-thinking individual who believes in the value of human life over other species ought to vote for any of these individuals.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not this particular infanticide policy of the Democrat Party is going to gift wrap the 2020 election for President Trump and for other people who are pushing back against this. Because I can't see how it will have traction unless they just engage in the most outrageous voter fraud and voter theft practices, which we see happens occasionally, but you'd have to really ramp it up. We've only got a couple of minutes here left. We've got three minutes left. I wanted to ask you this. what does the future hold for? I believe you work with a group called Life Training. What's the group you work with? What's that?
Life Training Institute. So
yeah,
I'm the West Coast director for Life Training Institute, which is a national pro-life organization.
All right.
And as far as we know, we're the only pro-life organization in the country that systematically goes after and works with Protestant and Catholic high schools and colleges. Everything that we've been talking about this afternoon, Mark, can be summarized as this. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. And nowhere is this more true than the issue of abortion. Mm-hmm. The idea that some human beings can be killed because another group of human beings decided that that victim class didn't have what they needed to be valuable. That is a bad idea, and that bad idea has yielded 60 million victims, dead unborn children who were killed through legalized abortion since 1973. So what we do is we attack the ideas that make abortion plausible in the first place. So I do public speaking and presentation on Protestant and Catholic high school and college campuses, public debates on university campuses, presentations and trainings in churches, pregnancy care clinic banquets, and conferences, with the whole idea of equipping the next generation to be a gracious and persuasive voice for the unborn by making the case for life from science and philosophy, because we are only going to end this battle with a majority of voters who control the electoral landscape to turn over Roe v. Wade and then pass legislation to protect unborn children in the womb from being killed through dismemberment. That is how we are going to turn this around. And until a majority of Americans believe that and are willing to vote for that, we're going to continue seeing abortion on demand legal. So that's what I do full time, bringing moral and spiritual clarity to the issue of abortion and equipping Christian leaders and students to be a voice for the unborn.
How do people, if somebody, one of our viewers or an organization of our viewers wants to contact you, I think that in the control room they're going to run your contact information on the lower third of the screen. But how do people contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a website. It's just my name, SethGruber.com, as well as our organization's website, ProLifeTraining.com. And my email is just Seth@ProLifeTraining.com, and you can get all that contact information on my website. And so this is a propitious moment. So if you are a leader in your church, a pastor in your church, a Christian or Catholic, Protestant or Catholic teacher or principal, this is the time to begin engaging this issue with your students, because your students are getting educated. Our churches are getting educated on abortion either way. They're hearing all of the talking points. And until we as Christians begin to educate our people with the same zeal that the pro-choice people are educating their people, then we won't see abortion overturned. So the time is now.
I want to thank you for being on the show. We're coming into our closing moments. If you want to be a sponsor of Freedom Matters with Mark McIntire, contact me. My information is on the screen, mark@markmcintire.com. Seth Gruber, thank you so much for being with us, and much success with your campaign to educate and be a voice for the unborn and now the born. Thank you, pal.
Thank you, Mark.
See you.